You serve zero purpose.
I feel like all of the monsters in Godzilla's Rogues Gallery fall into one of three categories. To start with, you've got the big bads. The most iconic, universally loved, or simply the most threatening kaiju Godzilla has ever faced. No doubt the likes of King Ghidorah, Rodan and Mechagodzilla would be amongst the monsters in this group. On the other hand, you've got the bums. The crappiest kaiju that through some miracle have been granted the courtesy of sharing the screen with our beloved face of the franchise at one point or another. This would include infamous series suckers like Big Condor, Kamikurus, and I hate to say it, but Ebera too. I know, I mean, look, I love the movie too, but you gotta admit, Ebera low-key trash. However, there exists a group of monsters who fit somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. Divisive kaiju where opinion varies based on who you ask. Examples of monsters that fit the bill in my eyes would be Augur, Batra, and of course the subject of this video, Space Godzilla. Fans have taken a liking to this particular kaiju as of late, though I suspect that has more to do with fan-based content, headcanon and memes, over anything official. Personally, I'm not in on the hype. Space Godzilla is nothing more than a milquetoast reskin whose pure evil personality has been done far better by kaiju before and after his debut movie. A movie that is tied with Raids Against being the most boring Goji film. Despite my misgivings towards the character, he's starting to look like a potential candidate for the next Monsterverse film, now titled Godzilla x Kong Supernova. I mean, that was my first thought upon seeing the logo. Not only is the film literally called Supernova, but even the background is somewhat reminiscent of space. Will Space Godzilla be the next main antagonist? Who knows? But you know what? I would be so down for him to make a comeback. I stand behind the fact that Space Godzilla is lame, but he has a lot of potential. Somewhere there's a badass hidden amongst the mediocrity, and in some instances that cool factor has kind of been realised. Maybe with another movie appearance, it's finally time to make Space Godzilla a universally loved kaiju, standing amongst iconic series veterans. If they ultimately decide to make him the big bad, it won't be easy, as there's a lot of problems his character faces, from his design, fighting style, to even his very existence being an absolute mess. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the many problems yet insane potential of this divisive kaiju, and the one time that potential was actually realised. So with that out of the way, let's get right into it. First of all, what a better place to start than with his rather dull point of origin in Godzilla vs Space Godzilla. Commonly cited to be the weakest of the Heisei movies, which is a sentiment I would 100% agree with. Technically speaking, it's not a bad film. I mean, the cinematography is without a doubt phenomenal, which is no surprise considering it's the same guy who did Godzilla vs Mothra a couple years prior. Another gorgeous looking movie, and one of my personal favourite Goji films, but I digress. The scene that highlights this particularly well is Godzilla's first appearance. There's a lot of really cool and unique matte shots on display here, including one where we see Major Yuki, one of the protagonists, matching pace of Godzilla's lumbering shadow as he bolts for cover. Not only does it just look cool, but it also highlights the sheer difference in size between the two, which is ideally what you want out of a kaiju film, right? I also love just how much of an unapologetic asshole Space Godzilla is. What's the first thing this guy decides to do upon arriving on Earth? Why, assault and traumatize a defenseless baby, of course. There's no real reason for him to do this other than to be a dick, and once Godzilla arrives, he imprisons his son and just bolts out of there. We later see that baby Godzilla is fine, so the only reason Space Godzilla traps him was to annoy and aggravate his daddy. I think that's what makes Space Godzilla different from other kaiju. He's a unique kind of evil. Too bad they don't really tap into this with the overly long drawn out finale, but that's besides the point. What else? I mean, the Space Godzilla and Godzilla suits themselves look pretty good, and the score's okay I guess, and yeah. That's about all I got for praise. Unfortunately, there's just so many blunders and missteps that completely overshadow the elements this movie actually gets right. For instance, like I said, they aced the Godzilla and the Space Godzilla suits, but then you get to Baby Godzilla and good god, what is that? He looks worse than he did in Mechagodzilla 2. They completely removed all of his cuteness and resemblance to Godzilla, turning him into a bargain bin fast food mascot. I mean, I guess that's pretty appropriate for Junior, huh?
Cheeseburgers.
Speaking of downgrades, the special effects in this film are just noticeably inferior compared to prior films. The first example that comes to mind is the NASA astronaut recording, which is green screen bad enough to make even Gamera Guardian of the Universe blush. But the most jarring effect in my opinion comes from Space Godzilla himself, funnily enough. Specifically his telekinesis and flight. It's hard to take him seriously as a threat when Godzilla Jr. is flailing like that in the air. It looks a lot better later on when fighting Godzilla, but still. In this scene it just looks like Jr. is being lifted with wires with nothing to suspend your disbelief. The same applies to his flight. Seriously, how is he moving like that. And don't give me some, well, actually reason from the wiki. Just from looking at Mechagodzilla, Mothra, Ghidorah, etc., I can see how they are capable of flight via jetpack, wings, and what have you. Space Godzilla is just unconvincingly suspended in the air. I've reiterated over and over again about how boring this film is, and for the longest time I couldn't remember exactly why I thought that. Until I decided to rewatch it recently and it all came flooding back. The prime reason why this movie feels so long and drawn out is due to the climax. Roughly an hour in, Space Godzilla travels to Fukuoka and builds a fortress around this tower from which he derives energy from. He parks his ass there for the next freaking hour, and man does it drag. I talked about this in my All Godzilla Fights Ranked video, but again, this fight is just so repetitive. Space Godzilla just sets up camp, zoning Godzilla out, and it just goes on and on and on. Nothing happens on the kaiju side of things throughout the second half of the film, and it's not like the human story is a major hook either. There's nothing engaging or epic about the action here. Half the time there's sparks and other effects just flying off for no reason. Grant Sputor, I know you're watching this. Whatever you do, please don't copy whatever this crappy excuse for a climax is. Look, I could go on, but this isn't a video about the movie. The reason I bring up its less than ideal quality is because it reflects badly on Space Godzilla and his reputation. To elaborate, given that this is his first outing, fans are naturally going to associate the character with his appearance and portrayal in this film. Space Godzilla? Oh yeah, that weird kaiju from that mid-ass Heisei movie, yeah, I love him, he's great. It's kind of like how Silver the Hedgehog will always be that new character from the worst Sonic game ever made. Granted, this kind of association does fade both with time and future appearances. Some might recognise Silver and associate him with his appearance in the comics more than the games, since he's barely in them. The same can be said with Space Godzilla, only with movies instead of games. This is where being the next Monsterverse antagonist could be a massive benefit to the character. If Space Godzilla appears in the next Legendary movie and ends up kicking major ass, then that will become the new norm for the character. The new defining standard which future iterations will look to for inspiration. No longer will Space Godzilla be associated with divisiveness or mediocrity. Don't believe me? Well, just look at Anguirus. People love him now, and I rarely hear anyone talking about Godzilla raids again. Godzilla vs. Gigan, Destroy All Monsters, and Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla are the films usually brought up when talking about Anguirus. The point is, being in the Monsterverse could be a great opportunity for Space Godzilla, and the kaiju could definitely use it considering he literally isn't in anything else aside from other Godzilla multimedia. If they plan on adapting Space Godzilla into the Monsterverse, there is one barrier they will have to overcome, and that's the reason for his very existence. You see, Space Godzilla was created from a clump of Godzilla cells entering a black hole. It's your typical sci-fi super science explanation you've probably come to expect from the genre at this point. The problem is, how on earth are they going to explain Godzilla's cells going into space in the first place? The original film benefited from being part of a continuous timeline. If you've been watching the films in order, then you already know how Godzilla's cells got into space, via Biolante's remains dispersing into the atmosphere. And it's not like they can change the origin all that much either. I mean, his name is Space Godzilla. He's inherently derivative of everyone's favourite radioactive monster. If they were to create a new origin where Godzilla wasn't involved in any way, they might as well make a new monster at that point. I'm guessing this is a big reason why Space Godzilla was never used in future movies. He is so intrinsically tied to Godzilla that explaining his existence is somewhat of a headache. The same goes for a lot of the Heisei and Reiwa era kaiju now that I think about it. I guess it wouldn't be too out of the question if they do inevitably decide to use him. The Monsterverse did briefly dabble into the extraterrestrial with King Ghidorah, but who knows? Regardless, it's not just Space Godzilla's debut I take issue with. I also have a problem with Space Godzilla himself. His design, to be more specific. I'm not sure how many people agree with me on this, but personally I feel his overall look just stinks. And don't get me wrong, it's not ugly or horrendous to look at. I mean, it's no Manila, that's for sure. But fittingly enough, like the movie it came from, the design is just extremely lackluster. They literally just slapped some crystals on Godzilla's shoulders, placed a crest on his forehead and called it a day. He looks like a power-up for Godzilla, which I guess makes sense considering the design was heavily influenced by the Super Godzilla power-up, which you can pick up in the SNES game of the same name. Both designs being created by the same dude, and when you see them side by side you can definitely see the resemblance. However, therein lies the problem. He doesn't look like a new character at all, just compare his final appearance to Biollante. Both were created from Godzilla's cells, only Biollante absolutely crushes it. Her design is arguably one of the best in the entire franchise. It's radically different from anything we've seen before, yet you can still clearly see the Godzilla influence. Now I know what some of you are probably gonna say. Dude, he is literally called Space Godzilla? He's supposed to look just like Godzilla but in space, in the same way that Mechagodzilla is Godzilla but a robot. And I mean, yeah, I get where you're coming from, but I would refute that because to me, Space Godzilla isn't evocative of space at all. Those crystals could be just about anything, and the rest of him just looks like any other Godzilla, so nothing about his appearance really screams space. As for his moves, I mean, he has your standard beam, he can also shoot his crystals, and of course the telekinesis he uses on both Godzilla and his baby. Again, I'm not really seeing where the space element comes into play. The closest he gets to embodying outer space is with his flying asteroid form, which looks like a comet in the opening scene, so you know, I'll give them that at least. Still, they could have at least had Space Godzilla use more spacious attacks, like, I don't know, maybe he can shoot his beams through mini black holes, or maybe his scales could be made of moon-like rocks or something. I mean, I'm just spitballing here, but you can see what I'm getting at, right? It seems to me like they left the space out of Space Godzilla. What makes matters worse is that some of the concept art for the Space Godzilla suit shows a lot of promise. In my opinion, looking superior to what we eventually got. It seems the crystal motif was there from the start, but some of the designs definitely incorporate the space aspect a lot more heavily than the final design, with sharp protrusions all across the body, not just the shoulders. Even the skin looks like it's made out of a type of space rock or something of the sort. On top of that, I really like how some of the concepts aren't even bipedal, harkening back to Biollante, who is also integral to Space Godzilla's existence. Some of the concepts are quadrupedal, like what we eventually got with Ghidorah down the line, and man, that would have been so cool to see. If there's one thing the Monsterverse is known for, it's the rather dramatic redesigns of classic monsters. Kong and Godzilla are pretty much what you'd expect, but Mothra, King Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla look well different than what we see of them in their debut films. Hell, making Godzilla pink in the new Empire was a pretty ballsy move, all things considered. If they decide to bring Space Godzilla into the fold, you can bet your ass they'll give him a fresh makeover. They should definitely aim to infuse as much space as they can into Space Godzilla. That's the most overt way to improve on the original design. Potentially they could even go back to the drawing board and take inspiration from the original concept drawings. I know I've sounded overly critical and potentially nitpicky on Space Godzilla's design. And look, I don't hate it, but you know, I just think it could have been a lot better. So far, I've talked about the many problems Space Godzilla faces, almost all of them originating from his debut film. However, there was one time outside of the movies where Space Godzilla's potential came damn near close to being fully realised. Enter Godzilla Rivals vs Space Godzilla, a one-shot comic book released in 2023 with art and story by Matt Frank. This isn't the first time Space Godzilla has appeared in the Godzilla comics, however, this is definitely the most prominent and defining appearance, given he is the main focus of the issue. The book depicts an alien civilization made up of snake and bug people, the former ruling over and oppressing the latter via religious beliefs that have sprung up over this mysterious quartz rock. An even larger rock orbits the planet from outer space, and after meddling with it, the aliens accidentally unleash Space Godzilla himself, who then goes on a merciless rampage on the planet below. That's pretty much the gist of what takes place in the book, although it's up in the air whether my assessment is entirely accurate. You see, the book never directly tells you what is going on. All of the characters speak an unintelligible alien language, and the only narration we get is via a loosely translated artifact which speaks in a very vague prophetic manner. Sometimes it's difficult to tell how the narration even relates to what is happening on the page. If I've missed the mark at all when it comes to what this book is about, then that's why. I haven't actually looked up anything about it, these are just my own conclusions. Anyways, that's what I love about this book. You could probably read through it in a couple of minutes, but because the narration isn't 100% reliable, you have to examine the art more closely than you would at any other comic, in order to get a sense of what is happening. Something the readers should be all too eager to do because the art is blooming gorgeous. Seriously, just look at it. Look at it! Matt Frank knows how to draw monsters, and this book proves it with flying colours. On top of all that, this issue is also a perfect demonstration of Space Godzilla's unique brand of evil. An example of this is near the beginning of the book, where a bunch of people who worship Space Godzilla stand in front of him to prevent the military from attacking, only for all of them to be crushed without a care in the world for getting in his way. Whereas a kaiju like Destroyer is more sinister and sadistic, Space Godzilla is just a petty, tyrannical douchebag. This is most overtly displayed in a rather infamous scene towards the end of the book. Space Godzilla makes his way towards the mysterious quartz rock, which ends up cracking open, revealing a newborn baby monster inside. The dude takes one look at this baby, reels back in disgust, and just straight up crushes it in his hand. Like, the man has no chill, destroying the entire planet in a fit of rage because after all,
there can be only one.
Man, if this was people's only exposure to Space Godzilla, then I could completely understand why he is so beloved. It's a perfect way to end the book, showcasing just how much of a tyrant this guy truly is. Combine that with some amazing artwork and you've got yourself an awesome one-shot every fan and Space Goji simp should read immediately. It also helps that the book actually takes place in space, evoking the extraterrestrial vibe a hell of a lot more successfully than the movie did. I don't know if the Monsterverse would be willing to commit such a giant lore expansion like adding aliens into existence, but but it would definitely only go to benefit this kaiju if nothing else. While not my first choice, I think Space Godzilla would be a great addition to the Monsterverse. I'm not as big on the character as a lot of fans are, but I definitely see a huge amount of potential just waiting to be explored. Legendary's Monsterverse being the perfect opportunity to tap into that potential and give our extraterrestrial king the comeback he deserves. With that being said, that's all I have to say for this video. Like if you liked, dislike if you disliked, subscribe for more quality content, and I'll see you guys next time.